Welcome to this podcast. This conversation is a little different from what you usually hear in the startup world. Most podcasts feature founders who have exited successfully or investors who backed the next unicorn. Today, we're doing something more rare and hopefully more real. I'm Naama Moran. I'm the co-founder and former CEO of Cheetah Technologies, a startup that aspired to revolutionize the wholesale food service industry with an Amazon-like e-commerce experience. And it's a company that sadly is now winding down after 12 years in operation. And with me is Lior Susan. Lior is the founding partner of Eclipse Ventures and the lead investor in our Series B. Eclipse invested over $30 million into Cheetah. And today, instead of celebrating an IPO or an acquisition, we're going to be reflecting on a journey that didn't reach its intended destination. Both Lior and I come from similar beginnings in Israel, Lior from a kibbutz and me from a moshav. And we both built our careers in Silicon Valley. Both of us are driven by a big belief in technology's power to transform industries. And along the way, we've shared many moments of alignment and also many points of tension and friction as most founders and investors go through. In today's conversation, we're going to be reflecting on the journey of investors and founders, what drives us, what it means to back bold ideas, how to navigate failure, and what we've both learned from working together. Without further ado, I'm super excited to be welcoming you here, Lior. We're both going to be talking in English, which is not our native tongue, but with the hope that this message can get heard and listened to by more founders. So let's get started.
It's great to be here.
So Lior, I think one of the things that I was interested in working with you is that we do share this shared background in growing up in these unique type of communities in Israel. You grew up in a kibbutz, I grew up in a moshav. Both of them are communist, socialist, intentional communities, very tight-knit places to grow. And I wonder if you ever reflected on what growing up in a kibbutz contributed to you becoming a venture investor, and especially with respect to taking risks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I good friends of mine told me that from the most socialism life aspects of growing up, you becoming the most capitalism is kind of you're doing an autocorrect to the other sides. But as you know, naturally, my parents didn't own a car or did not have a TV, and as a kibbutz community, you kind of share all of the resources, and it was like just a beautiful place to grow up as a child. I actually think that my entrepreneurship journey started in the kibbutz, as it's a place that pushing young kids to go and work out in the farm. In my case, and I grew up bananas. Woke up, with tractors, fixing things, arranging parties. I actually think doing a lot of things that pushing your boundaries in a very early age that I think help later on when you're thinking about taking risks and entrepreneurship.
So you worked in basically picking up bananas in the fields?
Yeah, yeah,
That was
exactly.
like
That
the
was my
main,
specialty. That was my specialty. Yeah,
main
everyone works in
expert.
a different. Yeah, everyone work in a different field. That was mine.
Maybe that was your first encounter with some of the inefficiencies of supply chain and industrials.
I have this romantic idea that this industries picked me rather than the other way around. They started in agriculture, moved to defense, moved to manufacturing, so it just picked me.
Yeah, that's interesting. For me, I also reflected a lot about it, and it was exactly what you're saying, from very socialist type of upbringing to super capitalistic career, where I did find that my background has been super valuable is that I feel that I grew up with a lot of safety at home. Like I always was able to feel safe outside, going around, playing outside, going between people's houses. Because we lived in such a small community, you had to create relationships with people who are not your parents and your family from very early age. You had this extended family. So you grew up in a place that gives you safety and essentially nudges you to develop relationships and be a lot more independent from early age. And I think
Yeah, yeah.
that's give me this feeling that I can just go about the world and do my own thing, Does that
Yeah,
resonate?
yeah, 100%. It's actually I think the being independent is huge in this environment. Like I'm thinking about a kid and he's 16 years old driving this really, really large tractor
Yes.
before you have a driver license. And there is so much trust in you actually doing the work, waking up in 4:30 a.m., going in the field, working with the rest of the crew, doing things that will only outside of that part of the world will the expectation only from very adults to do this job. I think you're a kid and you're getting that responsibilities and freedoms and independency that I think served us well as we were kind of breaching into the world of technology.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there, growing up in a kibbutz, you ended up serving in a very elite unit in the military, the equivalent of the Delta Forces in the American military. And one of your stories that I just can't forget is how you said that while training for your role in the military, you ended up hanging on to a tree for like 3 days. What about that experience you think you took with you to your career as investors, like taking super bold ideas and starting also from scratch in a completely different part of the world?
Yeah, I think the military, I guess, like many other militaries or many other special forces around the world, people always contribute to the notion of the physical aspect when actually the reality, the biggest thing that you've been working on is the mental aspect. Like
Yeah.
needs to hide without people to find you, and I thought that that particular tree will be a great place above the ground from the dogs that they will use to smell you.
Do you
Um,
remember what tree it was, by the way?
I don't remember what way. I do remember that it was extremely uncomfortable after many hours, and I find myself kind of moving between different places. And funny enough, I was thinking how to entertain myself, and I was singing songs like old Hebrew songs to myself to just have the time pass by. I do not remember if which tree though it was, but I think it's doing a companies, doing startups, operating, being entrepreneur, I think the main thing you test is your mental strength.
Yes.
And I felt like being gifted in the military from very early age, kind of pushing the boundaries of my mental stress.
Mm, absolutely. I mean, so many times when I speak to especially people who are starting an entrepreneurial career, I say that entrepreneurship is a game of the mind. It's
Yes.
really just like the resilience and the frame that you're taking on whatever is happening is what's going to keep you in the game.
Yeah, 100%. Other thing is, and I'm happy that you're doing this interview, and I think it's connected to the overall teams. The reality is the majority of companies will fail, and the majority, it's just the statistics.
Mm.
And I think to keep building, and I failed and I succeed, and keep doing that. And as a founder or as an investor or investors and
Mm.
founder, there's a lot about the mental strength to go through this pain and just decide that you want to do it again because you're obsessed with a big problem.
So, what would you advise to, let's say, a founder that did not grow up in Israel or did not have the opportunity or the desire to go to like the Delta Forces? How did they develop that type of mental strength?
There is trees everywhere. You can go go find a victory. Hey, the honest thing, I don't think it's for everyone. I think, like everything else, everyone say, "Hey, I wants to be Elon Musk," and I'm like, "Yep, there's only one Elon Musk, and there's a reason of that. The guy is obsessed, and will be able to sacrifice everything in order to build the companies." I think it's just very hard to do. But yeah, my advice is to do it for the right thing. Is I did not. Um, Go to that particular unit just because I wanted to be a big Rambo is because I had a much deeper purpose. And I think when you do a company, is like if you just want to, I don't know, get rich or be successful, might work for you. I would not work for me, but might work for you. I always find that it's usually coming from a much deeper reason of people of doing that, and usually that will serve you when it's getting hard, and it will get hard to
Yeah.
have the strength to keep going.
I want to share that I'm on a completely other side. I didn't go to the military service, and as you know, not going to the military service in Israel is like a big decision, especially growing up in the kind of communities where we grew up, where it's the ethos to go and serve in the military. And my father was a general in the military, and it was a really difficult decision for me because I was afraid I'm going to get ostracized by my family, by my community. And yet I just couldn't. Ethically, it was very hard for me to do that. I think also a defining thing of entrepreneurship is like having conviction, what you just said, being willing to sacrifice for that. It's just my conviction was in a very different way of approaching life at the time. But yeah, it's one of those things that sometimes you're wondering, how did I end up in this entrepreneurship career with all the suffering and ups and downs that it brings? And then you're kind of trying to trace it back to your history. And I think that my decision, for example, with respect to the military was probably my first truly adult decision in life.
Mhm.
I decided to separate myself from the world I grew up in. Uh, and yet, probably once you are also kind of willing to take that level of sacrifice, emotional sacrifice, you're also preparing yourself to take other sacrifices in the future. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's an interesting one.
I think it goes back. I see a lot of people are trying to be like someone else because that person being successful, and I always go to things like, no, it needs to be authentic to you. And I think entrepreneurship is coming from in different shapes and colors and stories. Yours will be different than mine, even if we grew up not too far from each other. I think, people drop off from high school and people are
Yes.
becoming professors, and people grew up in India and people grew up in Wisconsin, and people had a father that was a founder and people had a father that did not have a job. I think it all goes back to the personal story, and I'm a big believer in chip on shoulders, and chip on shoulders can come from very different reasons.
So to that point, do you ever had a situation where people were asking you why Israel is the startup nation, or was calling itself the startup nation? Like, is there just like a higher concentration of people with chips on their shoulder in Israel, or what is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal answer, I don't know if it's the right answer. It's my personal view. I think Israel is a startup as a country. So in some way, the whole idea of the country start as a startup of like kind of fighting against the odds. You are the small company against the big companies, then the numbers
Yeah.
kind of don't make sense. Very motivated, small group of people that are united together to something that is greater than them. In some way, I think it's in the DNA of the establishment of that country, and I think it's continued into the DNA of what it is today, and actually having extremely high concentration of startups. But I actually connected that to the establishing of the country and how it's actually started. That for me, very similar to how you actually start a startup.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Because I think a lot of people think it's because of Israel's early investment in high-tech technology, which is connected to its need to defend itself with technology. But actually, you're saying something really interesting, that it goes even deeper than that. It's the founding of Israel, actually the founding of the kibbutzim and the moshavim, which were
Was
really the pioneers
uh,
that started Israel,
I mean,
is a bunch
uh,
of like 20-year-olds or even younger people that left, Europe to go to Israel, to like a completely barren place, and basically start from nothing, and just because of their ideology. So yeah, that is a very interesting connection.
exactly. Exactly. That's my personal view. And even before technology in Israel, I mean, the kibbutzim where I grew up, before the establishing, it was nothing there. And naturally, it's an extraordinary agriculture, very sophisticated agriculture that is being built pre-technology. But I think, goes back to the same story. People left a comfortable life or semi-comfortable life or similar situation, united around a purpose, and kind of went out and worked really hard against the odds and somehow being successful. And it sounds to me like the startup DNA, if we want to build an equivalent to the world of technology.
Mm. It's a good segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about. Like another thing that I felt, that we share in common is that we both left, our place, our communities, our families, and went to the other side of the world to basically start from scratch. Like both of us share these like humble beginnings. You've been a lot more successful, but and very bold, in what you've been pursuing. Like, what drove you in like doing that? Tell us a little bit about the story of how you came to the US and kind of decided that you're going to be revolutionizing not just any industry, but the hardware, industrial, supply chain, manufacturing, like the kind of stuff that VCs have always didn't even look down at it. They never even looked in that direction. And here you are coming and like saying, I'm going to raise not just a fund, but a multi-billion-dollar fund to revolutionize these industries. Can you tell the story of that?
Yeah, I would say that was not a strategy, and I did not know that that would be the outcome, to be clear. I think it goes back to follow the passion. After the military, my brother started a company and I helped him a little bit, and he was very successful with that company. And I got the opportunity to meet the CEO of a big manufacturing company called Flextronics, and he have me join him and help him. What was my first really, we'll say, at scale an American corporation, this notion of digital transformation. And I was not laughing, saying, I grew up in agriculture, moved to defense, moved to manufacturing. So it might be my purpose, but I was just obsessed with this notion of the things that are physical. I moved here in 2012, and I could not get excited of the world of software. And nothing against the world of software, but something about me, about my passion, is in the real world, and like walking the field in the kibbutz, walking the fields of the battlefield, walking the fields of the manufacturing is just it's me. I'm thriving in those places, and I just obsess with what's happening around us. It's also always felt to me Silicon Valley is very good on having small part of society is actually involved in the success and the fame and the outcomes. But the reality, the majority of the world are not in Silicon Valley. They are in those manufacturing, they are in those fields, they are in those industrial setting. And I just it was obvious to me that I will never be able to do anything that is not bringing technology to physical industry. It just was very obvious to me pretty fast when I arrived here.
Yeah.
I know I didn't know that that will turn to a fund. I didn't know that that will turn into a much bigger fund than I thought that I will do. I just knew that this is where's my passion.
It turned out to be very visionary in hindsight, right?
I
Now
said,
all the rage is about American dynamism
right.
and robotics, and
Yeah.
this is actually where all the cool shit is coming down with AI going into the physical world, and where we're probably going to see some major transformation in the next decade. So I guess you followed your intuition, but it turned out that you were glimpsing into the future.
I don't think I'm necessarily a big visionary, and for sure I don't have uh, any magic ball that telling me where the world is going. Um, my view, though, that was always cleared, the largest part of the economy relying in those industries. And
Yeah.
it was clear to me, being in Silicon Valley, that the same technology transformation that we are all so familiar from the world of mobile and IT and cloud and SaaS and enterprise software is going to migrate into those worlds. So I was sure about that. I naturally didn't know when it will come and what shape, but my view was pretty fundamental, basic of just where the GDP is.
Yeah. Hmm. It's a good segue to start talking about Cheetah. So, for me, when I was working on Cheetah, it's a company that was trying to revolutionize a very old school kind of industrial supply chain. I'm not sure if you would put it in the industrial space necessarily, but it's a
Yeah.
supply chain
Logistics. Yeah.
space, logistics, where, restaurants are sourcing their ingredients. And most people don't even realize how big the market is. It's like
Huge.
$300 billion industry that is just been going on behind the scenes of restaurants and commercial kitchens. And it was very difficult for us to find investors who got it, because most people didn't even know about that market, like that it's so huge, and it's literally there behind the kitchen doors of every coffee shop and restaurant they go to. So meeting you and Eclipse was like incredibly fortunate for us, because you were actually focusing on this type of opportunities. What happens to you when you meet a company and you basically form a conviction to invest in that company? I think a lot of founders don't really understand what's going on for investors, and that is actually a really interesting opportunity to share. Like, As a venture investor, you are in the business of capital allocation and risk arbitrage, and you need to very quickly formulate these convictions and just follow them. So, what is the process? And maybe if you can remember what led you to form that type of conviction in Cheetah and decide to invest in Cheetah back in 2019.
Yeah, I would say that at Eclipse, at least, we all came from an operating background. So in some way, I think it's very positive and unique because we can actually go and walk alongside our companies. And I will say that I'm enjoying building companies more than investing, actually. And it's always like, if you ask me, it's like put a gun to my head and say you can only do one thing in the rest of your life, writing check or building, I will go build. I will not write checks.
So, you would
Um,
actually prefer to be an operator rather than an investor.
Correct. Yes, I'm actually viewing my role at Eclipse today as operators on steroids because I can operate multiple of companies rather than one. And my personal preference is not to be in the front. So I actually don't need to be the CEO. I don't need to be on stage. I'm actually happy to be in the back, helping the founders and the CEOs. But yes, the way we design Eclipse and the reason we only hired operators to the firm is because our view is we are the product and we also investing. So operators with capital, maybe rather than venture capital. By the
Mhm.
way, I recently heard you met my partners, Pierre, that is actually 95 now. Pierre mentioned something I did not know. This industry originally called adventure capital, not venture capital. Actually, venture capital is a shortcut, is a short version of adventure capital. And I
Yes.
actually felt like when it started, it was operators investing and working with the
Yes.
companies, and actually it's turned to a much more transaction.
Yeah,
But
like
anyhow,
Pierre himself, actually. I think he's the exact
of course,
example, right? He started at
exactly,
Fairchild
exactly,
Semiconductors and he was an operator and then he became
exactly,
also a venture investor.
exactly. It's exactly. So that's the approach we took. I would say that when we started Eclipse 10 years ago, we will, on average, we'll see, call it 400-500 companies a year. This year, we'll see about 4,000.
Wow.
So there is much more companies in physical industries, and we're excited, and it's really good. And we are not 4 people anymore. We're actually 27 people at the firm, so we have more resource to go and look on these companies. I get a lot of emails of people of like, hey, but why it's a pass? I'm doing logistics, whatever. I'm doing robotics, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, because not all of the robotics or the logistics I actually can invest. The reality we will invest in, I don't know, 11, 12 companies a year max.
Yeah.
And that means that on the 3,987 that we will pass. So it's a big number of games. And you're right, we need to actually form conviction really fast on something that is extremely early stage. In a lot of cases, we will invest in 2 people in a presentation. Like there is no even a company that will needs to form our view.
What are these early signals that you're looking for to
Yeah,
form that conviction?
exactly. I think there's like 3 things that we usually are looking, and it's we call it the TAM, the tech, and the team. Not very groundbreaking, but we're trying to double click at least for what is for Eclipse. Mm. I would say that as your fund size is growing, actually the magnitude of the outcome that you're looking to find is needs to grow as well. And things you can do in $100 million fund, you cannot do in a $700 million fund. So that
Yeah.
we also needed to dial our knobs as we've been growing the fund size in order to look on a much bigger companies. I
Mm,
would say the one thing we never compromise is the quality of the people. And I know it sounds obvious, but it's not obvious for us. The one thing we will struggle is actually the go-to market. And the one thing that, funny enough, if we ask most people, they will think that this is the one we will fail. The technology, we almost never fell there. So it's
mm,
actually almost never that the technology didn't work or we were necessarily wrong on the people. It's almost always we missed on the market and kind of the company, introduction to the market, the inflection point to the market, the go-to market. This is the toughest part of this business, at least in
It's exactly what Marcusson once said, right? That it's this very famous interview where he says that oftentimes VCs, they say that they ask them like, what is the reason for a company's success? It's the technology or the people? And he said it's neither technology nor the people, it's the market.
it's a
And it's
market.
the timing for the market because there's
Correct.
so many examples of companies with actually very dysfunctional teams
I
that have succeeded, as well as very dysfunctional technology that have succeeded, right? Think about Twitter. It was
yeah,
breaking almost every other
yeah,
day
yeah.
when it started, and yet the pool was so big.
Yeah, I said big part of this business is to not die on your way to the glory. Actually, a
Yeah.
lot of amazing companies didn't succeed not because they had the wrong tech or the wrong team or the wrong idea. They did not have enough juice to continue and flip in other cards till the go-to market actually took over. And it's tough. It's tough because we have on a daily basis, we are seeing it of like super frustrated. And, we can go back to Cheetah and I can share more the reason we invested. I think is a great example of I actually was familiar with the space with Cisco and US Food. It's not my Cisco, not with C, with S and Y.
Yes.
And my big brother actually have a restaurant chain and a coffee chain, and I was just familiar with him from the stories and Max Brenner, how broken is the supply chain and how hard it is for them to get the right ingredients at the right time, and the food waste and how food waste killing their business and how the ingredients suck and how this just industry did not really change. It's still you're picking up the phone and you say, give me tomorrow 4 plate of milk and 5 plates of eggs. And hopefully it will show up tomorrow. You don't know when it will show up, if it will show up in what quality.
Yes.
And it's like very, very broken. And by the way, for what it's worth, I do think we will see a successful company in these sectors. It's not going to be Cheetah, but someone will build a digital first next generation food B2B. I have no doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind.
And do you think it could be just one of the incumbents themselves
No,
digitizing themselves?
no, never, never.
You
It's
think it
it's
would be a completely new company?
yes. It's like the reason Target didn't start Amazon, and the list is long, right? I can give you a million example.
Yeah.
Lockheed Martin didn't started SpaceX, and GM didn't start as Tesla. So it's like it's always the incumbents are just it's so trunches the way that they're running business. It's impossible for them to change and digital transform. At least I did not see yet a successful
Yeah.
story.
Now, I want to reflect a little bit about what you were talking about earlier with respect to the time to market. Cheetah, when you invested in our Series B, we were like growing like crazy. And at the time, we were partnering with one of the largest cash and carry suppliers in the restaurant industry called Restaurant Depot. And then we were growing so much that we were about 20 to 25% of their volume in the Bay Area. The CEO calls me for this important meeting in New York. I fly out to New York and he says, lady, we decided that we're no longer going to be continuing to expand our partnership with you. And in the Bay Area, this is kind of the max you can get. And we built our entire growth strategy on that partnership. I mean, we were planning to expand with them nationwide. It was a really big part of what we were planning to do and how we were growing. And when I reflect back on, on the decision to then, what we decided together was to vertically integrate, meaning to actually try to import these thousands. We had over 1,000 customers in LA and in the Bay Area and millions of GMV. We decided to port it onto our own vertically integrated supply chain. It was a very bold decision. It was
Yes.
like a really difficult one. We also didn't have necessarily the experience of managing that level of supply chain. When you think about it, on that decision back then that we made, would you make it again? Like how do you
100%.
think about it today?
I will do exactly the same thing today.
You would?
Yes.
Why?
Because
Like,
I
I mean, I
think, yeah,
guess we didn't have
yeah,
that many alternatives back in the day, but
yeah, true.
I'm curious
Uh,
to hear like what made you again feel that conviction to make something that was such a bold decision at the time.
It's interesting. Is I think the reason we've been pushed to go it is the reason to do it. The incumbents have no reason. Restaurant Depot had no reason to have someone disrupting the last mile because they're actually partnering with the other incumbents, with the food vendors, with the Cisco's and the US food. And actually, the status quo is very healthy for these people because they can maintain their market share.
Yeah, each
And I
one of
think
them has their own niche, and they kind of agree
exactly,
to squeeze the
and they are
pie. It's
like
kind of like,
they
essentially
are
an oligopoly.
it is, and they have like a. And by the way, I see it across the physical industry. It's not unique for the food industries. They essentially
Mm.
have a gentleman agreement that you're not going to come to my lane. I will not come to your lane, and we'll keep doing business. And when you have someone coming disrupting, you must almost by nature vertically integrated, because if you were relying on some of the incumbents in the value chain, it's just a matter of time how until you will get screwed.
Yeah. And then speaking about timing,
Yeah.
not that long after you invested in Cheetah in the summer of 2019. And
COVID.
together we took this very bold decision to vertically integrate, and we ran essentially a skunk room operation. We had literally two floors in Soma. One floor was working on the vertical integration. The other floor upstairs were still selling the restaurant depot delivery
Mhm.
service without knowing about what was going on in the second floor, because we were really concerned about the room we were getting to our customers or to Restaurant Depot. And we were running like this for nearly 9 months, diligently preparing for this massive transition. And then we started the transition September 2019. And we're in the middle of the transition where in March 2020, the COVID pandemic started. And we were basically
Was not great
confronted.
timing for us.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least. I kept repeating. I remember in our board meetings this Mike Tyson's quote when you
Yes.
get punched in the face.
Yeah.
And we were in peak financial exposure at the time. We were
Mhm.
like literally just porting our resources into these warehouses. We signed very long-term, super expensive agreements. I mean, what was going on for you at the time? Can you, maybe now that everything is kind of like years behind us, can you share how did you feel?
I mean, you had one of them, I had 50 of them. In parallel, going into all of my companies have physical operation, and 50 of
Yeah.
them getting Mike Tyson's punches in the face. I remember really well because also, kids stayed at home and all of this thing. Um, I was not freaking out. I almost went to a military mode. I remember like I'm writing everything on a sticky note that like the things I needs to do. I went to my soldier mode, and I was like, okay, this had just happened. I need to find out how much cash I have in the company. What is the run rate, assuming zero revenue? What is my exposure, and how to plan what I need to do here next with the warehouse we just took across the bay. Uh, Men's plans and God laugh, or whatever is the phrase, but it was not part of our planning to get a pandemic while we're rolling up that strategy.
It was probably like one of those moments where you can really see like who the people are, because I remember there's so many interesting experiences. One is I remember our walk in Hadad
Yeah.
Park. For those of us here listening, I love the redwoods in California, and I love to do walk and talk. So I asked you to come and do a walk and talk with me in Hadad Park, and we were talking about like what the hell are we going to do? And you were actually talking about the fact that you were going through this like mental exercise which you just described, and you reached the conclusion that we need to actually pivot to B2C, because at that time like the restaurant business was
Yeah.
shut down. And it was like coinciding with the intuition that I actually had a few weeks before the shutdown actually started. I went to like a weekend in Bodega Bay just to clear my mind, because I sensed that something big was going to happen. And while I was in that weekend, a friend of mine in New York City started sending me pictures of empty shelves in Whole
Yeah.
Foods. So that type of panic buying in supermarkets started back then. And that night I called my co-founders and my US co-founders, Vince and Chris, and I said, guys, like we have millions of dollars of perishable industry. We'll have to figure out how to do B2C. But the fact that, in our walk and talk, you actually said the same thing and you had that conviction was very important for me as a founder at the time, because it again required like a massive pivot. Like, we just finished a
Mhm.
huge pivot. All of a sudden, we have to do a completely different one and start like selling to consumers, which required a complete adaptation of our supply chain. And all of that while also ruthlessly, my this is where English is hard, ruthlessly cutting cost and bringing, the whole operation down in order to survive. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I think it's as I'm saying is this business is not an easy one. I think people are doing a lot of podcasts and people are doing a lot of PRs and writing a lot of books about success. The reality is 99.9% of the company will not be successful. And it's not an easy. You need a massive sacrifice, and you need to your commitments and conviction. I actually think conviction is an incredible tool in this business, and not because you know the answer. I did not know the answer. I didn't have an idea of what is the answer, but I had the conviction. And I think when you have a conviction, you can take another person with you into that conviction, and that person can bring another person and that conviction. And suddenly, instead of freaking out and say, "Oh, we are in the middle of the battlefield, we don't know where we're getting shot, and everyone running," you're like, okay, let's figure out the plan. This is the information that we have, and let's just get the rest of the crew behind us. Um,
The one thing that I mean, there's two big things I remember about our relationship in that time. One is just the fact that Eclipse came in and just backed us up pretty immediately with very straightforward terms. That there was definitely like a reduction in our valuation with respect to the Series B that we just raised, but it wasn't like predatory. And I think that's something I wanted to highlight, and I think needs to be known, that oftentimes in situations like this is where, investors have a lot of leverage over the founders, because frankly, they're the founders' only hope. And so in situations like this where you have that level of misalignment, investors do take sometimes advantage of companies. And I think I would say to Eclipse merit that you guys came up with fair terms. Like, it was clear for us that we could not ask for the same valuation or flat valuation. Like,
mhm.
everything was different.
Yeah.
And yet I think when investors take advantage of these type of situations to maximize, they create strong long-term misalignment with the founders. It really hurts the trust. So not only we were aligning on the strategy, you actually backed it up and you did it very fast. That was, I want to thank you for it again. Just like the way you operated was really helpful for me as a founder at the time.
Yeah, I mean, as an operator, I didn't want to be treated different when we were on the other side and we
Yeah.
operate and someone else was an investor. I also always go to back to the same point as, at the end of the day, you need the CEO and the management team to run the business. If you want to step in and running the business, different story. But till you don't, they need to be extremely motivated and aligned. And for my short experience in this business, I don't think people got super wealthy by taking advantage. I usually think it's a very short-sighted that usually will end up not in a great outcome for anyone.
And at the same time, we also started butting heads
Yeah.
about the RAF reduction in force. And that was a really tough one. At a time when I reflect back, I just refused to accept the magnitude of the event. I hoped it's gonna be over in a couple of months. And I had a really, really hard time letting go of people, because at the time we were already probably about 200 people, including operators and corporate people that took us so much time to recruit and train and bring into the culture and the organization. I am incredibly loyal to my employees. It's like, I think one of the things that made me like run Cheetah for so long through so much pain is that I have this like deep loyalty. Like, I will fight tooth and nail for my employees. And yet, you and the other investors were very clear that we needed to have significant reduction in force. And I was not willing to accept that. And in fact, what happened in a retrospect is that Cheetah ended up doing not just one RIF, we ended up doing 3.
Yep.
Later on, I reflected and I knew that in hindsight, I should have done 1. But I'm curious if you have memories of that time of us butting head and me really, really insisting that we should not lay off people and we were like not aligned there.
Mhm.
How did you feel about it? And how does that how do you operate in situations like this with other companies when you are not on the same page with the founder? And the founder is very stubborn.
Yeah, I mean, I've intent to pick them very stubborn. It's probably me. Um, I think a couple of things. I think one thing Pierre taught us, and it's like when you need to cut it once and cut it deep, because the
Yes.
organization just it's very hard to recover the organization spirit and DNA of doing that multiple of times. And by the
Yes.
way, I don't think there's a company in the history that did not do reduction in force. So you are going to do reduction in force. It's just a matter of when. Um, so I think that was the first thing. I think the second thing is the one thing, the reason we got conviction behind Cheetah is because of the culture. So it's almost like you're asking the CEO to do things that is opposite to his belief, or in the opposite of the reason that we invested in the company. Because I remember walking in the Soma office, kind of going up in your guys' elevator in the first meeting ever that I met you in person at the office. And I remember the elevator opened up and it was like a big table straight, I think, where people ate. And on the right side, you had all of those SDRs and the sales team, and there
Yeah.
was gongs and it was fire and it was like leading board, and you could feel the energy of the organization, and it's only coming from fighting tooth and nail for your people. So it's like it's incredibly hard to ask someone to do the things that is opposite to what he believes. But when I start the discussion, that the main job here is to not die on your way to the glory. And if you are not going to cut enough, you will not see the inflection point that you need to generate in order to raise more money, in order to keep with this incredible vision of transforming food supply chain B2B. So yeah, it was very obvious to me what needs to happen, but I had the sympathy, although not sharing with you, because I need you to move to that direction of why it's so hard for you. And yeah, you ask on every day, almost every day, I have a disagreement with my CEOs or management on certain of things. And I always find that I hope that they see me as a partner rather than an investor, because as your co-founder, you always have disagreement and you have some agreement. In some area, you move closer to your co-founders. In some areas, the co-founders moving closely to you. It's not because I have all of the answers or necessarily knows better than the CEOs. It's just I'm there on the fight and I have different data points and view and a pattern recognition that they maybe don't necessarily have when they're focusing on one company.
So this is actually one of the things that I thought would be really interesting to reflect. I mean, do you think that founders understand what investors are really going through? And do you think that investors understand what founders are really going through?
I mean, I think I don't. I do not think I necessarily, as an operator, understood what the investors are going through. And I remember I had not tons of sympathy to investors because I'm like, oh, they don't understand what I'm going through. In
Mm.
some way, I have both experience, so maybe I can have the sympathy on both sides. But I think the reality is like everything else, right? When it's hard, it's harder to have an empathy, and when it's fun and everything up to the right, everyone have tons of empathy. That's the human
Yes.
nature. Human nature.
Do you think that it's worthwhile for founders and investors to actually have this type of candid conversations even before the term sheet is signed? For example, like let's say that you and I have a conversation and we talk about like how do we operate when things are not going well? And you say, you know what, if things are not going well, like I would expect you to do 1 reef as opposed to like 3, and we will cut deep into the bone. as opposed to like doing it multiple times. And here is the rationale. How do you feel about it as a founder? I mean, maybe founders who really want to close the deal at this point will say whatever they think the investor want to hear. But so many times we just prepare for the upside. But then when the downside comes, we're oftentimes not prepared. And that was a very stressful thing for me, for example, at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was already operating a company that was like nearly dying, butting heads with my investors, and something like this was really hard, even though it's interesting that in hindsight, I completely agreed with the investors, but I couldn't see it, at the time. How would you do it differently, now that you know what you know about Cheetah, for example?
It's almost like that's the notion of hindsight 2020 that I don't think, although with all of my experience going through now multiple of those examples that I mean, I'm sure I'm changing things and kind of the muscle memory is pushing you to change things. I actually think there's a huge issue in this industry that right now we are going back to this notion that that there is so much momentum in deals and people want you to write the term sheet after 30 minutes meeting. Otherwise, someone else is writing term sheet. And I think it's an issue because you didn't even spend enough quality time with the management teams and the founders to actually work on creating a bond. So we are refusing to do that stuff because we just believe you are going to go into a long journey. It's a tough journey. We want to make sure that we have a relationships and understanding some of the values before we started this 10 years relationship. Maybe if I take in particular on Cheetah, I think knowing that this is your superpower on the culture, I probably will try to get the outcome of the big riff with a different way than maybe the way that they deliver that message. I feel like I could, if I take the time back, I will do it in a different way that was much more empathetic and maybe kind of going there and I don't know, figure out something that will give you maybe the warm fuzziness that I think you were looking for while making that tough decision, because it is a human psychology, and rather than like, listen, we must do it, we don't have time, my soldier way of doing things.
I mean, I've reflected on this in a broader context, right? When I was reflecting on my mistakes or with the things I would have done differently. Rather, I think it's a really interesting thing. The word mistake or failure, like when you think about it as learning, it takes a completely different meaning. But if I'm thinking about myself today as a much more experienced founder, I'm like, how can I build mechanisms that are, in the design of my decision making and the design of the organization that would just like help me to streamline hopefully into a better outcome. And not that different than how you're talking about your own fund, trying to build mechanism to avoid the hype cycle, right? You're saying the whole VC industry right now is caught in some kind of a hype cycle, and you're building that mechanism where you're saying, I'm actually not going to be giving 30 minutes answers. I have a certain protocol that I have to follow because that's what maximizes my long-term success. It's very similar. You see what I'm saying?
100%. And we actually built an entire mechanism internally from before the investments and after the investments. We run the entire portfolio on what we call core value drivers, CVDs. Each of the companies will get 4, 5, 6 CVDs that we will track every month. That will be that the CEO and us align on those CVDs and just helping us seeing what is tracking, what is concerning, what is not tracking, what is overperforming. Because it goes back to we don't want to get surprised or we don't want to needs to react on a second. We actually can building a mechanism that will help us and the management team to, I think, be much more aligned.
So now talking about failure, Cheetah, actually, even before we go to failure, like what leads up to that is something that you were talking about earlier, is being able to cut to the bone so you can save the money, so you can live another day, so you can ultimately get to that vision, you can ride that market wave, right? And Cheetah ended up being alive for 12 years. For 12 years, it operated in different, configurations, in different markets, in different business models, provided service to the restaurants. But when do you actually need to be intellectually honest to call it quits? When your operator mentality potentially conflates with your investor. responsibilities?
I'm sure it's happening more than I would want. I actually learned, some of the things is my job is not to fix problems. My job is or not to be the one that fixing the problems. My job is to actually help the founders and the management teams fixing those problems. And, your first muscle instinct when you see something is to lean in and go and fix it, when the reality is you're not operating the company. The company needs to build that muscle memory internally. You should just helping them based on that experience. So I would say it's a daily walk with not only myself but the rest of the team, because they're also operators, of how to make sure that we are helping our companies fixing the problems and putting the bricks and building those companies without us doing the work. Because I think when there is a huge problem or huge mistakes, the first instinct that you will have is to jump in and try to fix it by yourself.
This is a really interesting one, like how to make sure that you're not actually jumping in to fix the problem because you're actually an investor and an operator. I'll reflect about myself, okay? Like, I was running Cheetah as the CEO for over 11 years. And eventually I stepped down 2 years before the company ended up closing down. And I never thought I will step down. It never even occurred to me. I actually think it's a necessary ingredient for founders. And this is probably why a lot of founders are very young, is that they just don't even conceive of a failure. Like, I never conceived that the company can fail. It never crossed my mind. Even despite all of those different crazy challenges that we had, I always thought that we're going to be successful. And the company became bigger and bigger, and we had more and more investors, and I became more and more entangled, in my commitment to the employees and the investors. And yet, like, on my personal life, things have actually shifted. Big things have shifted for me. First of all, I ended up like falling in love with Costa Rica, which was a completely different, angle to life that I didn't expect. I ended up coming here on a visit, and my family decided we wanted to actually live here, and I kind of innocently thought I would be able to keep traveling back and forth because we were still in like pandemic mode. But it really, in hindsight, was more than just like a shift in a geographical location. It was calling a different part of me that was ready to, you know, start taking a more center place in like who I was. And then I was going through, navigating my mom's cancer, and I started feeling always more and more, pained that I was not able to spend the time with her. I knew that she was kind of coming to her end of life. And it's almost like, frankly, like life had to force me to say I'm stepping down. And even after I already decided that I'm stepping down, the board still had to say, Nama, this is like your deadline. Like, I needed that nudge, which was very difficult for me to take at the time. But I'm also grateful that this has happened. What happens for you as an investor when you decide to not make any additional investments in a company, or it's a company where some of your companies you're actually operating yourself for
Mhm.
some time, and you decide to
Yeah.
actually pull the plug? Like, what needs to happen for you to say, you know what, I'm no longer going to just survive another day because this is over?
Yeah, it's this is by far the toughest part of this business, and in some way, it's a protection. It's a mechanism to protect us to not even dream about shutting down something or quitting. It's you must have it as the leader of a company. You're like, of course I'm going to be successful. Of course we're going to change the world. It's like a part of this obsession. Actually, for me, it's going back when I'm thinking on who is our limited partners and my fiduciary to those hospital systems and university endowments and those foundations and pension funds, that I'm like, hey, we raised capital from non-profit organization of people, an organization that needs that capital, and my fiduciary is actually to look on not what I believe, not necessarily what I hope, is almost on the facts and make tough decision for them. And yeah, it's by far the toughest part of this business.
And how do you do that? Like I'm talking about my pain for one company, and you
Yeah.
have a portfolio of tens of different companies. You said yourself, like the vast majority of them actually don't make it. How do you communicate these failures to your LPs? How do you actually, even carry that responsibility on a day-to-day basis with respect to your LPs?
I say, the thing it's called the power law in this business. Basically, the notion there is if you actually will draw a graph, it looks like that. And it's basically starting from the top, and then there is a long tail, and from the top is like the multiple that you will make on investments. And in any fund, you will have two, three companies that make the most outcome, and then you have few companies that are doing three, four, five X's, and then you have a long tail that usually you will lose money. And what this industry will tell you, who cares about, you should only focusing your time and money on those companies in this very few in each fund. And I will tell you that I don't feel like that. And I we've been brutal honest with our LPs on any of the companies that we failed, and we shared our insights of what we got wrong and our learning. But yeah, maybe as a founder, as an operator, is each of those companies, it's feels tough when you shut down, or when you let the founder know that you cannot support anymore, or when you stop down the board. I still it's still like leaning on me. I don't good in the. I'm not good in. It's not transaction for me.
Yeah. Do you did you ever notice if like a certain failure has impacted your ability to do a future deal, or are you able to really fragment between them? For example, for founders, oftentimes founders who failed have a hard time starting another company. They're just like had enough and they don't want to do it anymore. How do you do that as an investor? And have you ever felt like you kind of were taking a pause on an investment because of a previous failure?
I'm trying not to. I'm trying to actually look on. I'm obsessed with building companies, so I kind of don't feel like I can do anything else. I just can't, even when I have like really tough days because of one company fails or another. Do I think one failure imply to not do certain industries or certain technology? Maybe. I need to think about it. I'm sure that the answer is somehow yes, but it's not something that is jumping on me.
Yeah. So if you're kind of reflecting on Cheetah, as we're kind of wrapping up our reflection on Cheetah, what do you think is like the main learning that you took home with you from your experience in investing in Cheetah and going, through multiple rounds of funding, staying, sticking it out with the company for many years until its most recent wind down?
I will go way faster to a vertical integration, like across the board. Like I don't know if you remember the stories with the trucks of we've been using third party trucks and they suck,
Yes.
and they kind of crash our NPS, and we decided to bring that thing in house as well in order to improve delivery time. So I actually think we will see more innovation happening now because people are willing to you to vertically integrated roll up businesses. You remember we roll up
Yeah.
two old school vendors. Actually, now there is so much more permission. It was so controversial when we did it. Um,
You feel
but
like
yeah,
there is more permission for this type of
oh
roll-ups in the
yeah, oh,
industry?
big time.
Why is that?
Because everyone now wants to invest in physical industries, and they understand that in a lot of cases, you actually wants to roll up a bunch of the incumbents and layer the technology on top of them
Yeah.
rather than build it from scratch. Yeah.
Like AI roll-up funds, for
For
example, or
example,
AI
yeah,
roll-up
yeah, yeah,
companies.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
So talking about founder and investor relationship, which is something that maybe not a lot of people are talking about. If we think about our relationship specifically, we are two very strong-minded, strong personalities, and we had, as I said at the beginning, a lot of alignment, but also a lot of friction. Like, what what did you most value in our relationship, and what was the hardest for you, if you can reflect back on that?
I think investors and founders, or investors and operators, it is a journey, and it's like a journey, like a partnership with your, partner or spouse or husband or wife. And I think, like any partnerships and a journey, you kind of need to walk on the partnership. I often say that a relationship between investors and founders is actually much longer than the average marriage in United States. Uh, that's
That's
that's the reality, and you kind of I think people don't do, I don't think we did enough. And we did quite a lot of like just working on the relationship because it's, it's, it's going to get hard and it's going to get exciting. And I think as much as the relationships is aligned between the investors and the founder, should be a better outcome. What I valued about our relationship is, I think, the transparency and I think both you and I are very direct, and we kind of didn't hold back from each other of how we are feeling about certain things. That I think it's a huge communication is a huge tool in any partnership. What I will do different if I need to take time back is I think what I said is I could have much more empathy on certain of things that I ask you to do or push, and I think we will, although we had a very direct relationship, I think we had our own moments of talking over each other. That I wish I will at least will do my part of not doing it.
Yeah, I think it's just human nature, and especially when the emotions get high. I mean, for me, I can tell you that whenever that happened, it was very difficult for me. But I always said he really cares. Otherwise, he wouldn't get so emotional. Like he really, really cares. And I think that's oftentimes, when I speak to other fellow founders, I think there is oftentimes a lot more feeling of this like divide between investors and founders because sometimes our interests are aligned and sometimes they aren't. It's just the nature of the game.
Yeah.
So I would say that also for me, like being able to actually give you that direct feedback and your willingness to even accept it and receive it was I probably would not be able to work with you otherwise. And that was like a necessary component. And as we wrap up, what is most exciting for you nowadays if you're looking forward? What gets you super excited to come out of bed?
We take Eclipse kids every year to see our companies. And it's fun. Like now, there's a lot of kids now in Eclipse Kids Day. It's incredible to see my daughter's reflection of actually going into see a company that have a automated warehouse or self-driving cars or robotic systems that building products, and to see those kids and how they are passion and interest in where the world is going is just giving me a lot of joy to know that I'm spending all of my resource and missing kids' birthday and missing a lot of stories before beds and making them meals because I was traveling to work with the companies constantly, to know that that's not for nothing, to know that hopefully with our success and our company success, we're going to leave this place better for them. And it's not only, oh, fine, you did a little piece of software and you made yourself more money. It's like each of those companies will have a significant impact on humanity. And I'm excited about it. I feel like it never been so good time to go and transforming physical industries. I'm just super excited about it.
Lior, thank you so much. It was really incredible to have this conversation with you. It also is like a personal, feeling of closure. Even though I left Cheetah 2 years ago, it's just like coming together and reflecting on this with you means a lot. And I hope it's going to be valuable also for, these other founders listening to us, as well as other investors. And I think that, yeah, the founder investor relationship is truly a journey. And we would all benefit from like seeing the human in the other side and coming together to work as a team. So I really appreciate all the learnings that you shared, and the true passion that you have for transforming industry is totally coming across. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. I am encouraging I, by the notion of actually talking about failures and what did not work in this industries, because I think we all can learn from it. So I hope more people will follow your lead here.